Welcome. We still have some people coming in to join our gathering, but as we're getting started now, allow me to introduce myself. Shalom and greetings on behalf of the Meyerson JCC. My name is Rabbi Shana Jaffe. I'm the Director of Jewish Life, and we are so excited to welcome you to this evening's discussion. My first request, if you haven't had a chance to do so yet, is to please mute yourself. And if not, we'll find you and do it for you, but it'll be easier if you just go ahead and do it as we get started. Tonight, we are here and so excited to welcome two incredible scholars, thinkers, and friends of the JCC to share with us and learn a little bit together. We are living, as they say, in unprecedented times. When we were first thinking about hosting an evening about Unorthodox, it was spurred by the multiple times the show came up in conversation with a variety of a group of people. Whether we were discussing the show with our 60 and better JCC members, chatting on Zoom with young couples who had just returned from Israel, or talking in the grocery pickup line with friends beyond the Jewish community, in March and April, people were talking about this show in very passionate and personal ways. Why has Unorthodox been so resonant? Perhaps it was due to the confluence of a huge marketing push from Netflix coupled with the timing of sheltering at home. Perhaps it was also had to do with both the universal story of a young person finding their own path and voice in a setting that is at once exotic as it is particular. Whatever the reason, we at the J were deeply impressed by the resonance the show has had with so many different people. And we wanted a reason to come together and be together even when we cannot physically gather in large groups. Tonight, we will learn from Arna Fisher and Dr. Michal Raucher, both scholars in their own rights and really insightful and interesting people. What we will not be hearing from as we discuss this show that is set in an ultra-Orthodox setting is from anyone in that community itself. Therefore, as we discuss and learn, we understand it is within the limitations as to some extent that we are viewers and voyeurs into a particular community. But at the same time, we hope to focus on some of the universal aspects of this program. And since we organized this event, the world has tilted again. To borrow a sentence from Rabbi Jonathan Hecht at HUC, he recently said, "I often wondered what it would have been like to live through the Spanish flu. And at other times, as I studied history, I wondered what it would have been like to live through the Great Depression. And during the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s, what it would have felt like to feel the nation roiling and marching to address racial injustice. I just never expected to live through all those eras at the same time." The world we are living in at this moment is hard. We can feel deeply and care deeply about what is happening. We are trying to navigate all this upheaval and pain and disconnect as best each of us can. Tonight, we offer a bit of a reprieve from the many troubling parts of the world. We do not dismiss or ignore the plight of the world. We do offer this evening as a moment in time to learn from thinkers and as a chance to see some familiar faces. If you go on to gallery view in your screen, you can see that. And a chance to maybe think about ourselves and how we navigate this new world. And now on to our speakers. Arna Poupko Fisher is a noted lecturer, educator, and author. She serves as an adjunct professor at both the University of Cincinnati and Hebrew Union College. She's on the full-time faculty at the Wexner Foundation. Arna has dedicated her life to Jewish issues, including the challenges and opportunities of Jewish leadership and the capacity for the Hebrew Bible and Jewish philosophy to inform contemporary communal life. Welcome, Arna. So good to see you here. We also welcome Dr. Michal Raucher. Dr. Raucher is an assistant professor of Jewish studies at Rutgers University. Before she moved to New Jersey, Dr. Raucher was a professor of Judaic studies at the University of Cincinnati. Maybe some of you had a chance to learn with her. Dr. Raucher conducted ethnographic research on reproductive ethics of Haredi, ultra-Orthodox Jewish women in Israel. For 2 years, she interviewed ultra-Orthodox women in their homes in Jerusalem and spoke with them about their reproductive lives. Her book, which is based on this research, will be published by Indiana University Press in November. It is titled Conceiving Agency, Reproductive Authority Among Haredi Women. Her research lies at the intersection of Israel studies, religious ethics, and the anthropology of women in Judaism. Welcome, Dr. Raucher.
Thanks, it's great to be here.
Great to see you. So in a moment, we're going to begin our conversation, and really we're going to set it up where Arna will be interviewing Michal. And they'll be having a conversation, and we'll go through a series of questions, and we'll learn a little bit as we do that. And as they're talking and delving into certain aspects that we've already thought about, you are welcome and invited to type a question into the chat function. Again, please keep yourselves muted, but you can go ahead and type a question in. And we have some wonderful helpers from our events staff here, Daniela Blackburn and Julia Madricki, and they will be compiling the questions, and we will, at the end, around 8:15, we'll come back together and we'll ask some of the questions that we can get to. Hope that makes sense. And in the meantime, before we get started, I would have one question, so just to get a sense. How many of you have had a chance to actually watch all 4 parts of the Netflix series Unorthodox? You can fill out the poll that I'm posting right now, and we'll just take a quick little tally. I've never used this function before, so I'm totally excited about this. All right, an overwhelming number of you have seen all of this show. So Arna, Michal, we've got really well-informed people ready to listen to you and ask some questions. All right, please take it away.
Thank you so much. It's amazing that so many have shown up for this. It's obviously piqued real interest in so many people. And I have to begin by saying that at some point when the series had just come out and we were just in the beginnings of the sort of trauma of the pandemic, I received a call that she got to me through many, many different phone calls trying to find my email address, my phone number, literally a long lost cousin from Calgary, Alberta. Had not heard from her in 40 years. We had an amazing conversation. It was very moving. And at the end, she said to me, you know, I need to tell you why I felt the need to reach out to you. And I assumed she would say, because of the pandemic, we were all trying to make these connections. And she said, I watched Unorthodox. So here I am with that as a beginning. We are so happy to have Professor Raucher here, who can really see this through a lens that is literally unique. So Professor Raucher, firstly, knowing that so many people have actually watched the series, we saw that from the poll. Thank you, Rabbi Jaffe. I'm going to begin by asking you, in terms of a woman's experience or women's experience, what areas of the Haredi life, culture, ritual, attitudes, philosophy, do you think the series got right? I think that's really on a lot of people's minds. Is this true, they're asking?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? That's what everybody wants to know. And just before I start, I just want to say thank you for, thank you to the JCC for hosting, for Rabbi Shana Jaffe for putting this together, to Arna for interviewing. It's so great to kind of be back in Cincinnati and be with all of you. And I'm looking forward to the conversation. And, when Unorthodox first came out, the conversation among, there's a kind of a small circle of those of us who study ultra-Orthodox Jews, and we were all receiving the same question, which is, how accurate is this? Is this real? Like, is Esty a real person? Did this really happen? And how reflective is this show of real Haredi life? And I want to, before I answer that question, I'm going to do something really annoying and professorial and have us all kind of back up a step and just make sure everybody's on the same page in terms of, you know, the fact that Haredi is an umbrella term, right? It's usually translated as ultra-Orthodox. It's an umbrella term that refers to a lot of different types of ultra-Orthodox Jews. Perhaps some of us on this call already know that. And SD, we understand, you know, as it's based on Deborah Feldman's memoir, comes from a Satmar Hasidic sect of Haredi Judaism. So, you know, and all of these sects have different clothing practices, different rituals, different theological commitments, different relationships to the state, to the government, right? Some of us know these things already. And so the thing that kind of, you know, I just want to put out there at the very beginning, even if SD is representative of one Satmar Hasidic woman's life, right? She's not representative of every Satmar Hasidic woman's life, right? And we have to kind of keep reminding ourselves of that. So I think the show got a couple of things right based on the research that I've done. You know, the gender segregation, the setup, the matchmaking setup, the hair coverings, although they're very quick to point out, if you watch the, I don't know how many of us watched the behind the scenes making of Unorthodox, the whole thing with the strimals and the fact that, you know, the strimals are not authentic. And if you were from this Satmar Hasidic sect, you would know that the strimals are not authentic because they're not made with real mink fur. Those are too expensive and the show couldn't afford them. So the strimals are not authentic. But the gender segregation, as I said, the matchmaking, the hair covering, the lack of sexual education is something that I found a lot in my research, particularly for women who have not had children yet. There's very little sexual education. The pressure to have babies is absolutely something that's reflective in many Haredi groups. So those kinds of larger things they did get right. Yeah.
So Michal, sort of telescoping out, going beyond the cultural, as Rabbi Jaffe said, the sort of exoticism of a Hasidic life and the ultra-Orthodox community, etc. What meta themes about women, identity, family, motherhood, longing, leaving, from your perspective as a scholar and a feminist and someone who's really had a remarkable voice in this field, what aspects of those themes do you think the series got right and allowed us to really kind of feel deeply?
Yeah, I think, so what, actually the very last scene, I think, was the scene that I found actually most accurate in terms of that deep feeling. I found it to be the most authentic. And that's because you see—
The scene in the bar where she's sitting in the coffee shop and she sees her friends?
Not that one. I mean,
the scene before that.
The scene before that. I forgot about that one, actually. The scene before that, when she's singing, right? And she goes and she realizes that her voice, right, when she's actually able to express her voice in a way that is authentic, that's the voice that she, right, from her Hasidic upbringing, right? The fact that these, this culture, this religious practice, these beliefs, these songs, the music, the food, right? All of those things are so deeply embedded in identity, right? And these are things that we all know, but in terms of somebody leaving, right, they can never really leave, right? None of us can ever really leave where we came from, where we grew up, where we spent our formative years. That piece felt the most authentic to me. The fact that it was within that tradition where she was finally able to really express herself.
Yeah, I think
and it really showed. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Finish your thought.
Oh, I think it really shows the, the tension, the kind of, maybe some of us want to think that she could leave and kind of forget the ugliness of the past. But the fact that those things are really still very warm and tender to her I found to be the most kind of authentic message within.
And the idea that it was the nigun and the Hebrew, it wasn't actually a secular song. And that made it for me really complicated and also so moving. I actually did think you meant very last scene, because for me the last scene, which seemed to be innocuous, right? She's sitting in a cafe and she sees her new friends. For me, that was every bit as moving as the singing scene, because when all is said and done, we just all want to belong, right? We want to feel that we have a place, that we have a community. And she was seeking a community, just not that community. So this is clearly, I mean, I remember people watching it and texting me in the middle, and my kids and everyone else, like, what are you on, number one, number two, number three? Did you see the singing scene? Why do you think this has it's really captured so many people's attention and interest, and they've stuck to it, even though it's such unfamiliar material? What's moving people so much?
Yeah, I have thought about this a lot too, because when I kind of watched it, you know, just because I'm so used to studying Haredi Jews, even though I felt very kind of when I was interviewing women, I was very with them and embedded in their lives and all of these things, they're still almost an object for me. And so I really thought a lot about what made people really wrestle with it a lot. And I think there are a few things. I think for a lot of Jews, there's a sense of nostalgia that watching Haredi Jews on TV offers. It's almost like watching Fiddler on the Roof, right? It's like, it feels good. It feels like familiar to us. But then kind of the other side of that coin is they seem foreign. And in that way, it's almost like watching a show about the Amish, right? They are, we are voyeurs into their lives. We're given this kind of sneak peek. We even get the sense, because of a film, a friend of mine who's a film scholar commented on this, and I thought it was really brilliant. All of the scenes in Williamsburg are very dark. You get this very kind of tunnel vision. You almost get this sense that you're looking through a peephole into their lives, right? And we're sneaking in. And so I think there's a piece of that too. And last, I think this show really validates what a lot of us who might identify as more liberal folks really want to see out of Haredi women, which is that they would just leave. That they would just, we have trouble understanding why somebody would stay within this community if, and remember, those flashbacks to Williamsburg really validate this, right? She's miserable. Everybody's mean to her. Even her mother-in-law hates her. They talk about her sex life. Like, this is just a mean, miserable. It validates all of these preconceived notions we have about Haredim. And, you know, and so the fact that she leaves, we all feel great. Yay, she left. We're clapping for SD. And I think there's a bit of that too. We're hoping for her. And it's not just hoping that she'll be happy, although I think a lot of us want her to be happy. I think we're also struggling to understand why someone would stay. And so if she leaves, it's easier for us to understand it.
Yeah, I don't disagree. You know, I think about the extent to which the series was editorially harsh, but in some moments, maybe authentic or kind. And in a sui generis way. I mean, if one hasn't been in that kind of intense religious, familial-based life, it might be hard to see the sweet nostalgia, right? The kind of things in Fiddler on the Roof that actually make us smile. But the scene at the Shabbat table with all the family, was it Seder? I forget. I found that very moving. But it's possible that others found it affronting in the way in which it was dominated by men. Do you think the series, and also her husband is a complicated guy. He's trying his best. What's your sense of that in terms of how sympathetic it was trying to be to the community and its values?
Yeah, I think her husband redeemed the community. He comes out as a powerful figure, and even at the beginning, you know, when they first meet, right, and she says, I'm a little bit different, and his response is, right, I like a little bit different, or so am I, or whatever it is. It's very,
we had such hope for them, right?
Right. And I think can't you make it work? He's so loving. Look at, he cut off his payas at the end. I mean, come on. But yeah, he really redeems it, because he shows that people are complicated, and that's the truth, right? People are complicated human beings, and that's what we often forget about Haredim, right? We think that because they all dress the same, that they must be the same. But that's not true at all, right? Think about every human being you know, right? Everybody's different, even Haredim, from each other.
Yeah, yeah. And so what's actually so interesting to think about, sort of springboarding away from the series itself and thinking about what it means for us as a community and as women in particular. Rabbi Jaffe and I were talking about when she first called and expressed some interest in doing something about this. She said, Arna, people are really traumatized and embarrassed by this and really uncomfortable, and their friends are talking about it. Thank God there isn't a water cooler because we're all stuck at home. And my reaction was, I wasn't embarrassed. I saw it as the way someone's autobiography was kind of riffed from. I saw it dispassionately, but you in your field, I mean, how do you understand that sense of even shame of Jews watching this? It's not them on the screen. So why are they responsible for these ultra-Orthodox Jews who they've never met?
Right. And I am fascinated by this because this show, I think more than the others, there have been a lot of shows about Jews on TV lately, right? I mean, I was thinking back, and I was just talking to Yoni, my husband, about this earlier today, right? I was confused. Seinfeld, I think Jerry was supposed to be Jewish, but it was never really obvious. We come to learn that it's this trope of the New York Jew, right? This comedic New York Jew, right? But at times I thought George was Jewish. I wasn't entirely sure, right? And then remember on Friends, Ross and Monica are Jewish, but that's not really mentioned. Their Jewishness is like a sideline. And then today, right, in the last 5 or 10 years, you've got Transparent, which is entirely about their Jewish identity. The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. I mean, there is so much Jewish there, and not even religious Jewish, just Jewish. Although Transparent, they're very firmly Reform Jewish. But Mrs. Maisel, there's no religion there. It's cultural Jewish, right? And then you have all these shows coming out of Israel now that are also very popular. Shtisel, maybe some people on the show on the call tonight have watched Shtisel. Our Boys, Fauda. There's a Jewishness is part of all of these shows, and I'm kind of fascinated at what I think people are most embarrassed by Unorthodox, and I'm also fascinated by this. I think there are parts of Mrs. Maisel that make me cringe, right? At least Unorthodox feels authentic in a way, or like it's striving for authenticity, whereas Mrs. Maisel feels like it's striving for, what's the word? Caricatures, right?
Yeah.
So and I've been thinking a lot, why are there so many shows about Jews as Jews on TV?
Well, we're clearly lovely. I mean, what's not to like? Who would not just want to watch Jews all day long, like the Jew channel, just watch us go at it. It is a funny thing. And we're so, I mean, Transparent, so cringeworthy, and so many moments, and it struck so true, right? We know Jews. We are those Jews in many respects. Our grandparents, aunts and uncles, we recognize it. But for most of us, Unorthodox, very foreign, and yet we took it so personally. So that's interesting. And maybe in some of the questions, people can sort of tease that out. Rabbi Jaffe, what were you hearing in terms of what made people so uncomfortable?
I was the one who called up Arna, like all up in arms about this show, and she told me to just not take myself too seriously. I think it's basically what I heard about this. Because really, I think it is exactly the fact that it's this ultra-Orthodox community feels in some ways exotic and not my lived experience, even as we cringe with the caricatures in Transparent and in Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Because it's familiar enough to us, I think people can say, oh, well, Shayna's not like that. But when it's something that's so different and yet still called, from my experience, and still called Jewish, I or others are being asked to explain an experience that is not familiar to us, and yet is still called Jewish. So I think that's part of it. It's I can't really speak to this, and when people who come up to me and said, oh, I like kind of like your friend, and you had a different reaction, but they said, I've been watching Unorthodox and I love it, and it made me think about you. And I was like, really? Like, I'm picturing the apartment in Brooklyn that she's literally fleeing from. And that seemed like such a joyless experience of Judaism. As the show progressed, as I watched more, I did see more of a joy and a warmth and a caring. But I thought, gosh, if this is what they're thinking that I spend my whole being, it made it feel very, it felt like I had to somehow justify it and explain it in a way that I didn't with those other shows.
Yeah, so to be clear, back to my cousin, and thank you for that, and back to Professor Raucher, I did live in Brooklyn. I didn't flee the apartment, but you know what my cousin said at the end of the call was, because I've been married twice, I liked the institution so much, I thought I'm going to do it again. I was married the first time to a rabbi, a wonderful rabbi, and our wedding was a typical Orthodox wedding up in Western Canada. Most people had never seen a wedding like that. And my cousin said to me at the end of the call, she said, when I watched you walking down to the chuppah, I thought to myself, poor little Arna, poor little Arna. So Professor Raucher, I want to speak to you about, one of the most, I would say, complicating pieces of this narrative, or any narrative that involves an ultra-Orthodox Jew, or a Jew who feels their life is actually not filled with complete agency and autonomy. And you working with Jewish students all the time, how do we make sense of the internal struggle of her really not finding herself as a person, but yet somehow giving credence to a life of intense religious observance? How do you see those two speaking to each other, Michal?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this is one of the things that I think I was really kind of frustrated about with the show, because it does present us with this image of Haredi women, of poor little Arna, right? Poor little Esty, right? She is actually little, right? She's tiny. She's Shira Haas is kind of perfectly typecast for this role, right? She's tiny. She's miserable. Everything's drab. She obviously has no agency whatsoever. That's the message we're taught. And the only way she can have any agency is by leaving entirely and just throwing off the yoke of this patriarchy. And one of the things, we have learned, scholars who work with women in conservative religious traditions, is that viewpoint strips women of agency, actually, right? In other words, it's a viewpoint that we are imposing on them, and not one that comes from their lived experiences. So when we study women in conservative religious traditions, we learn that they do make choices. Agency is another way of talking about, they're able to make choices. And we've come to understand agency, and actually all of our agency, as being constrained by certain limitations, right? And so Haredi women, or women in other conservative religious traditions, Islam, Christianity, are constrained in a variety of ways, but they still have a great deal of power and choice and ability to guide their lives within those constraints. And that's one of the things that I try to impress upon my students all the time. And because all of my students come to my class thinking, I have free choice, I can do whatever I want, right? Especially those who are new to college, they think they can now do whatever they want, until they realize they really can't, because they can't, spend hundreds of dollars doing something unless they have a job or they have parents who are paying for those things, right? They have constraints in their life, right? Even, certain norms that we'd like to throw off. If I wanted to, I don't know, somebody always suggests like bathing suits, right? You could, like a full body suit. Why not? What's the big deal? But you'd kind of get looks because we're all expected to wear certain types of bathing suits, right? Everybody's in certain ways, and we have a limited number of choices within there, but we do have choices. And Haredi women also have choices within their constraints. And that's one of the things that I try to impress upon my students all the time, that all of our agency is limited in certain ways.
That's a wonderful correction. I want to ask you about, for those of you in the call that do not know the expression chidush, it means a new discovery. an epiphany. It's what every scholar and academic hopes to be able to achieve in their career. And Dr. Raucher really has a chidush about Haredi women, which I'm going to ask you about. But before that, I just have to call out a question that I'm seeing in the chat, which is just such a wonderful question, because it's what everyone wants to ask but doesn't. One woman says, I'm not Jewish, but what's the deal with the string around the neighborhood? So we need about 2 hours to explain the string.
I'll let
It's
you
one
take
of
that
the
one.
most, it's one of the, I'm not going to answer, it's one of the most dreaded questions in Judaism, because the answer is going to be so unsatisfactory and you're going to think that we're all cuckoo. So Rabbi Jaffe will send my email address, and I'm happy to talk offline to talk about the string, which is the Eruv. Okay, Rabbi Raucher, tell us in a succinct way, what did you discover?
Okay, so so I went into, I was researching with Haredi women and interviewing them, and you know, I went in thinking, okay, these women have a very high birth rate, right? They have Haredi women in Israel have a birth rate between 6 and 8 children per lifetime, which I met women who had many more children than that, so that's kind of a total fertility rate is somewhat of an average. But I went in thinking, okay, they have lots and lots of babies. These women are probably just making babies all the time, right? Like, what is going to be, what are they actually going to tell me about their lives? And what I discovered, and it's so sweet that you call it a chidush. I'm so, that's like the nicest thing you could say. What I discovered is that, yes, they're having babies all the time. And we think that they're having babies is like them totally buying into the system, right? They have, like, they're just going to reproduce the exact system that has kept them subjugated and lacking control over their lives and blah, blah, blah. Except that when they're pregnant, they've made this realization about that their second or third pregnancy. Most of the women I spoke to said the same thing. I've been pregnant 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. My rabbi has never been pregnant. Why is he telling me whether I can get an ultrasound or go for prenatal testing or go on birth control or give birth in this hospital or hire a doula or any of these things that the rabbis over the last 20 years ago have said, we're going to make all of these decisions for you. You have to come to us for all these decisions. The women who have had multiple pregnancies are saying, no. When I'm pregnant, you're no longer functioning in the same line of authority. So normally, rabbis serve as interpreters. They're mediators between God, God's laws, and the people. A rabbi says, question about XYZ. And the rabbi says, well, in my interpretation of the laws, you're supposed to do this. Okay, fine. But the women say, when I'm pregnant, I don't need the rabbi anymore. When I'm pregnant, I have a direct line to God. And how do they understand that they have a direct line to God? They've developed a certain, what I call pregnancy prenatal theology, which involves seeing the umbilical cord as that which connects them not only to the fetus, but directly to God. And that's a unique relationship that nobody else in the community has. And they only have it when they're pregnant, and it only applies for pregnancy-related decisions. It does not apply for everything else that they would ask a rabbi about. It only applies to pregnancy-related decisions. But that's a really big, significant finding, because it demonstrates that women have a great deal of religious authority over their lives. And because of the role that babies play in the community, the vast importance of babies, right? They've carved out this really important niche where having a baby is therefore not just reproduction of the same male-dominated system. Having a baby is their opportunity female-dominated religious system. So it's a really kind of different way of looking at the way Haredi women participate in Haredi life as full human beings with agency and not just operating under these laws of the patriarchy that are applied upon them.
That's really a beautiful, beautiful research. By the way, the book will be out, everybody, University of Indiana Press in November. I imagine a lot of people listening to this must be thinking about the extent to which struggling with infertility in a community that values childbearing must be particularly fraught. And Michal, isn't it interesting that the Haredi communities have embraced science, right, in the most progressive ways in this field, in a way that's actually helped way beyond their communities. They're at the cutting edge of alternative options of being able to conceive. So interesting when the value is so high, the extent to which they're willing to go beyond the insularness and really embrace modernity.
Absolutely. And Haredim, right, you know this, are not anti-medicine. They're not anti-science, right? Even though a lot of us have heard about the anti-vaxxers, there's a lot to say about the Haredi anti-vaxxers, but the vast majority are pro-science, are pro-health, are pro-medicine, and fertility treatments are a wonderful example of this. And in Israel in particular, because the fertility treatments have been so welcomed by the Haredi community, rabbis have developed specialties that deal just with fertility treatments, right? And if you need a certain treatment, you go to your rabbi, you find out exactly how you're supposed to do it so that it to halacha, and it is really, really beautiful, and rather unknown. It also continues to reinforce the need to have a baby, right? Fertility treatments can also be painful and oppressive in their own way. So there's a push and pull there, but absolutely.
Yeah. So sort of the last question before we open it up for questions from everyone, and I hope our friendship will exist beyond this question because it's actually a tricky one. So we know Professor Raucher to be herself a serious, committed, spiritual Jew, a Jew who takes Jewish law seriously. It's not for you nilly-willy. So within that personal framing, do you think it's possible, beyond what you've discovered with respect to that moment of pregnancy, for a woman in an ultra-Orthodox or Haredi setting to feel fully realized? So the moment there's the imposition of a patriarchal kind of life, which it is, but a life which at any point, I guess, short of running away, in one's mind, one can have agency in saying, yes, I'm happy here, I choose this, I think this is the life that will give me fulfillment. Is that possible? Is that a dream? From a feminist perspective, is it definitionally possible for women to have that kind of completion in a world that's defined by a kind of patriarchy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think each of us has to ask ourselves that question, not to be too kind of internalized about that. But I think, for all of us, there are probably certain things we kind of would have loved to explore had we X. I wonder, I grew up in a home where it was very much expected that we would go to college, we would get graduate degrees, we would have professional careers. Like 3 out of 4 of my siblings are teachers. Like this is what we were going to do. And it was never said out loud, but we all kind of got the message, except for my youngest sister. She's the baby. She got to rebel and but she's an engineer. It's not like she's a dummy. So, and I think to myself, what if I had said, I'm not going to college? What if I had explored some other life? What if I wanted to do something else? And I think, I still think about that. What am I not doing by choosing to stay in the life that I've created for myself? We all have that. Does it mean I'm not fully realized? I don't think so. I think it's possible there was an alternative realization that could have happened if I were willing to give up any number of things, and one of the things that makes leaving the Haredi world so challenging is that it is so all-encompassing. There's a great scholarship that's coming out now on people who leave the Haredi world, and I'm happy to share the titles of the books in the chat in a little while. But what these colleagues of mine have discovered is that as much as they want to leave, it's really, really, really hard because it means giving up everything they've ever known. And, you know, I don't know that that's really a choice then, right? That then becomes a really terrible choice. And I don't know when I don't know what it means to be fully realized if that means we do anything that we want all the time. I don't think that's real life for any of us, right?
That's a wonderfully generous answer. Yeah, thank you for that. And this would be a natural plug to watch Mrs. America
Yes.
on Netflix now. If you missed the whole feminist era, just watch it. And also mostly Jewish women, right? Jewish women and African American leading the way.
Right.
Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi Jaffe. Michal, thank you so much, Professor Raucher. Amazing, amazing.
Keep talking. I just want to keep talking with everybody. So let's just keep it going.
When we
Great.
have another 10, 15 minutes, so let's enjoy. So thank you. Just listening to the two of you just go back and forth, I could be a fly on the wall for hours. So really thank you for taking the time tonight and being so vulnerable in a way too, of sharing your own personal experiences as well as they relate to Unorthodox, which I think is part of why each of us, we all have our personal connections to this story. I looked at some of our questions and you can see them as well. So if something's really jumping out at you, feel free to go ahead. But I think that there are several questions really about the role of women specifically. Really, I think this is for Dr. Raucher. Did you feel in your research that women feel enslaved by the culture they're a part of or actually embrace it because it's part of their culture? You alluded a little bit to this, but if you could answer that. And then the other question, once we get past that part, is there's several people asked about the hair covering, wigs, and how that fits in. So as you're both thinking about these questions, but really first the concept of this concept of being enslaved or embracing.
Yeah, no, I didn't find that they feel enslaved. That was not a word that they expressed to me. They expressed challenges, and particularly the social workers that I spoke to expressed challenges, like the fact that a husband and wife don't really have a relationship before they get married. And then, you know, some of the sex problems come in, but it's more in this sense of, you know, they don't really know how to talk to each other. You know, most of them have been kept in gender segregated groups for their entire lives. And so they don't know how to talk to somebody of the opposite sex. They don't have kind of deep relationships. You know, the women that I spoke to, part of the stipulation of the research was that you had to already have 3 children in order to participate in the research. And by the time you know, how to actually use that advantage. So, you know, they would things like, if I need to ask the rabbi a question, I don't actually go directly to the rabbi. I have to ask my husband the question, and then he brings it to the rabbi. And what that means is if they don't have a good relationship for talking about, well, how many kids are we going to have and when are we going to get pregnant again? And, you know, when I like seeing the baby on the ultrasound because then I know XYZ. If they don't really have that intimacy to talk about those things, then the questions never get to the rabbi. So for the women, that was kind of a right? It wasn't an enslavement. It was this is the nature of our relationship. And that's how it operates. So, you know, the social workers kind of looked at that from a removed standpoint and said, like, we need to improve the relationships. And the women that I spoke to, you know, kind of benefited from that distance. So yeah, enslavement was definitely not a word. No, I mean, that's one of the frustrating things about the show. You know, you get this sense that all Haredi women are miserable. And that's just not the life that I saw. They are, you know, they love, you know, where they live, and they also have friends. Essie didn't have any friends. The women that I spoke to all have friends. And you know, it does kind of, but that's part of the narrative that we're getting of Esty. She's a loner, she's alone, she's miserable. It's only when she leaves is she able to make friends and belong, right? And again, that could be for somebody who leaves. That's one of the things I wanted to say, right? We're getting a story of somebody who leaves. If you get a story of somebody who stays, you're going to get a very different picture, right? That's why Shtisel is so different than Unorthodox, for instance.
Interesting point. So just to go to the next question that we received several questions about, people are fascinated about the concept of head covering and hair. Especially the aspect of the scene where Esty shaves her head, what happens? Does her hair remain shaved? How does the whole wig work? These are the several questions from that category. And what is it? I think really the bigger issue is, what does that mean?
Right. So I can take a stab at this, but Arna, do you want to take a stab at this one?
I mean, that was like a softball. Look, it's a complicated and very personal aspect of religious observance, of Orthodox religious observance. And they're, like all of Orthodoxy, a spectrum of the extent to which one observes it. The shaving the head really has to do with a belief that when one immerses in the mikveh, which is what a woman does after menstruating, it usually happens about every couple of weeks when you're a young woman, there's an idea that the mikveh water should touch every part of the body, and therefore we clip our nails, we make sure that we're very clean. And if there's hair there, that might be ma'akev, that might get in the way of the waters. It has nothing to do with trying to look unattractive or that there's something inherently problematic about hair. Having said that, hair, beginning with riffing on the Bible, a little bit in the Talmud, but a lot in Kabbalistic material, hair is considered to be a very sexual aspect of a woman. And there developed a tradition that once a woman was no longer a virgin, and that was associated and assumed to be when she married, that her hair would be like the other parts of her body that are considered erva, nakedness, and only to be seen by the people in her most intimate setting. Children, husbands, but certainly not the public. You can tell a lot, those of you that have been to Israel, you see the wide spectrum, right, of Orthodox observance by the way women choose to cover their hair. So there's amazing things that are happening now with piles and piles of material, and the gorgeous Israeli women and the Hasidic community, you'll see them wearing a wig plus a hat on top. That's because one of the aspects of hair covering is that people should know that the woman is married. And they're worried that if the sheitel, if the wig is so natural, she will not be identified as a married woman, because there's very, very strict boundaries around the extent to which women interact with men who are not within their immediate familial circle. So then you have that. Then you have the more modern Orthodox women that'll wear hats or baseball caps, et cetera, and women who just want to look normal and be able to go to work and not be identified in that way, wearing wigs. I myself cover my hair. I remember when I moved to Cincinnati and I started riding a horse, and I struggled with, would I show up with a wig, take it off to put on the velvet hat, and I don't know, I was sort of hiding. I'd put it on the car, and then people would see me out socially and say, Arna, is that you? A lot of very awkward, overly personal conversations about it. Long story short, for me, the way I've explained it to other women, everything about Jewish life comes so easily to me. Shabbat, kashrut, study, prayer, dress, it's all so ennobling and brings me so much joy. And I say, you know, covering hair is actually difficult. And I'm grateful for an aspect of Jewish observance which requires a bit of a sacrifice. It reminds me of what a religious muscle looks like, and also keeps me connected to my community.
Thank you. Thank you. You addressed it a little bit at the beginning, but we also have several questions in this depiction, understanding it's one woman's story, especially one woman who left. Are there any aspects that are exaggerated or truly just wrong in your experience and your study of the ultra-Orthodox community?
Yeah, so The miserableness, I think I mentioned, is wrong. The other thing that I think is wrong is the way that she left. I think, again, I mentioned those studies about people who have left, and it's a much more gradual process. It's one thing at a time. It's just go back to the hair. Some women report, and this isn't my own research, these are my colleagues, but some women report that one of the first things they did is they stopped shaving their hair, and nobody knew except for the mikvah lady. And so, it was one of these kind of secret transgressions that they could do in a gradual process of leaving. The fact, I kind of got lost in the time frame of this show because it seems like this all happens in a week. And the fact that Essie could go into a store and would know what size jeans she was supposed to wear, I don't know what size jeans I'm supposed to wear, and I've been wearing jeans my whole life. So, and the fact that she could just kind of easily walk around, and all of that was just dramatized. And again, it emphasized this idea that this is an identity that she can just take off easily. As if it's not deeply embedded in her being. And so that really, really rubbed me the wrong way.
And to that point, actually, in the actual Deborah Feldman's memoir, and because I Wikipedia and looked up a few things, that apparently first she and her husband, they had a child together. They moved to another community that was a little less restrictive than her experience, but it was still an ultra-Orthodox community. And then they went through months of marital counseling. This was not a fleeing and being hunted down. That's a dramatization. And so this idea kind of really resonates. This is an encompassing identity and world. You don't just leave that world and know how to function. I think the other part is the difficulty of functioning in the outside world for her, just trying to find any sort of source of income, that she just didn't have the skills to do that. So she had skills in the world that she grew up in. She didn't have skills to navigate this other world. So the gradualness that people take this on, and the real push and pull. It's not an either or. We are getting some questions as well. Maybe one more question. What happens when people do break from the community? Is it a solid, in your experience and what you've been reading, is it a complete break, or are there points of connection?
So there are a number of organizations that help Haredi folks leave. And sometimes it can be really hostile. There's actually a great documentary that I recommend called One of Us. It was on Netflix a few years ago. That really shows some of the challenges that people face in leaving. Women in particular, women who have children, and this was something that was really kind of risky for Deborah Feldman. And, women who have children have a much harder time leaving, because if they leave, they're often not allowed to take their kids with them. And there are a number of court cases that have kind of worked this out for the Haredi community, because they would be seen as, kind of infecting their children with beliefs of, secular society. And so for women in particular, it's not an easy break. But, again, the stuff that I've read is that it's their, all of their friends are from the Haredi world. So then they have friends who are kind of in and out, and some of their friends are those who have left. But everybody's, the idea of their home communities is very much part of their new identities.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I think we have more and more questions that we can't get to. I'd like to leave, I'm glad we have more questions than we have answers for at this moment. That's good. Maybe we can do a reprise. If you found this conversation interesting and want to know more, read the book. And on July 9th, we're doing a talk with, we'll be discussing the memoir, Unorthodox. Thanks, Julia, the inspiration from the Netflix series. Before we wrap up, I would like to hear from Arna and Michal if you have any last thoughts that you want to leave us with as to think about, to chew on as we head out.
Go ahead, Arna. What you go first?
Well, I want to compliment you, so I'm going to let you go first.
Sorry.
Don't compliment me.
I was going to
Speak as an academic.
Great question. See, now I'm complimenting you first. So now you just, no, thanks for being a great thought partner. This was so, when we chatted just to see if there was something to chat about, I think we just kept going, and it was so, it's been just great to think about this. And I want to keep thinking about, which depictions of Jews on TV make us uncomfortable and why. And I was thinking that maybe part of the reason we're uncomfortable with this one is because we don't think they're watching the show. And so whereas Maisel and Transparent, we're almost laughing at ourselves, this one feels like we're looking into somebody else's life that isn't part of the conversation. We're almost talking about them behind their backs, which we are right now. So, maybe there's part of that there. But I think there's something, what does it mean for Jews as a minority group in the world, in America, to be on TV so much? When we spoke earlier, there are we mentioned a number of other shows that are on TV now about minority groups. And, if you haven't watched Rain Me, it's about a Muslim American family. Never Have I Ever is about an Indian American family. These are niche minority groups. And why are they on TV, and how are they functioning, and what stories are they telling us, and what stories are they not telling us? And I think those are really persistent questions that we have to keep asking ourselves. Yeah.
So, one of the things, and then I'll give you the compliment, one of the things that occurs to me about that in these micro communities or micro lives is, I think there's a detail, right? A texture, a richness to lives that are surrounded by this kind of intense history and culture and ritual. And isn't that so much more interesting than just the la-di-da, right? It's really very attractive. The compliment I want to give to you is, if I could turn my laptop, you'd see I have a whole shelf devoted just to feminist Jewish scholarship.
Yay!
However, many complaints about many of them, but the real great ones like Tikva Freimer-Kensky,
yeah,
and you, Professor Raucher, is your ability to study your subject with not only academic clarity, free of personal agenda, but also with a generous lens that allowed you to see this community as also a loving community, and how many women are happy. And this is a story. You really taught us how to look at something, and what a lesson in the time we're living in, how to look at something clearly and fairly and broadly, right, and empathetically. So thank you for reminding us how an academic can both be in the ivory tower, but also in the community, and bring those two pieces together. You're welcome. It's deserved.
Thank you so much. Thank you. What an opportunity. When I first came to Cincinnati, Arna was, woo! She was like the most brilliant, person in the community. And it is such an honor to be in conversation with you.
Oh, please take my shaitel and run. Bye, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, everybody, for this interesting evening. Thank you so much to Arna and Michal, Dr. Raucher and Arna Fisher, for really giving us a wonderful conversation. Like we said, there is more to come. If you're interested in reading the book, we'll be gathering on July 9th via Zoom. And I also want to offer a few more thank yous to our community. Susan Bradley Meyer and Ashley Stoker really started this conversation for us. And thank you for allowing us to start this conversation, to be able to bring it to our JCC community and to our wider community. Rebecca Benoff is our Jewish Foundation HUC Summer Fellow. So thank you, Rebecca. You added some really wonderful context to the comments. I love the conversation that kept going on the contact along the chat section. I'm going to put up right now a poll, I hope. And if you have time, it's 5 questions. If you can just answer the poll, it is anonymous. It just helps us as we're doing this programming. This is the first time we've done this kind of this type of program via Zoom. We're thinking about doing more of this type of online gathering at this level. So we'd like to hear your thoughts, your experiences, and we'll go from there. And thank you to Daniela Blackburn and Julia Mdicki for helping us run all of the operations of this. I hope you all have a wonderful evening and come back and let's be together again soon. Thank you very much.